Captain Raymond Whitmore stood frozen inside the Boeing 737 cockpit at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. The FAA badge in the black woman's hand gleamed under the overhead lights. The words "Senior FAA Flight Instructor Examiner" made his face turn pale. His 30-year career was about to crumble in 30 seconds. Before we dive into this incredible story, I want to know where you are watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below. If you believe everyone deserves respect, regardless of their skin color, hit that like button right now and subscribe to this channel. You will not believe what happens next when this arrogant pilot discovers the woman he humiliated holds his entire career in her hands. Denise Harper woke up at 4:30 in the morning on that October day in her hotel room near Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. The Texas heat was already building even before sunrise, and she could see the faint glow of aircraft lights through her window as planes taxied on distant runways. She had flown in from Washington, D.C. the night before, and despite the late arrival, she felt alert and focused. Today was not just another day at work. Today was the culmination of months of complaints, whispered concerns, and documented incidents that had finally reached the desk of the Federal Aviation Administration. Denise was 38 years old, a black woman who had spent her entire adult life proving that she belonged in spaces where people who looked like her were rarely seen. She was born and raised in Montgomery, Alabama, a city whose very streets echoed with the history of the civil rights movement. Her grandmother, Rosetta May Harper, had been one of the thousands of black women who refused to ride the buses during the Montgomery bus boycott of 1955. That story had been passed down through generations, and Denise carried it with her like armor. Her grandmother had walked miles to work every day for over a year, rather than accept the indignity of segregated seating. That same spirit of quiet resistance flowed through Denise's veins. Her father, Luther Harper, had been her greatest inspiration. He served in the United States Air Force for 25 years, flying cargo planes across continents and earning commendations that filled an entire wall of their small home in Montgomery. He was one of the few black pilots of his generation, and he faced discrimination at every turn. Commanding officers who doubted his abilities, fellow pilots who refused to fly with him, passengers who complained when they saw a black man in the cockpit. But Luther Harper never wavered. He flew with precision and grace, proving his worth through every perfect landing and every safe mission completed. When Denise was 6 years old, he took her to an air show and lifted her onto his shoulders so she could see the planes soaring overhead. That was the moment she knew she wanted to fly. Luther Harper died of lung cancer when Denise was 16. The disease had spread quickly, and in his final weeks, he lay in a hospital bed with tubes in his arms and oxygen in his nostrils, looking nothing like the strong pilot who had once commanded the skies. But his eyes still held that same fire. He held Denise's hand and told her the words she would never forget. "Baby girl, you are going to face people who do not want you to fly. They will tell you that you are not good enough, not smart enough, not strong enough. They will try to keep you on the ground. But you remember this: the sky has no color. When you are up there, you are free. So fly for me, Denise. Fly higher than I ever could." She had kept that promise. After her father's death, Denise's mother, a nurse named Dorothy Harper, worked double shifts to keep the family afloat. There was never enough money, never enough time, never enough of anything except love and determination. Denise worked 3 jobs while putting herself through college, earning a degree in aerospace engineering with honors. She saved every penny for flight school, where she was often the only black woman in the room. Her first flight instructor refused to teach her, claiming she did not have the temperament for aviation. She found another instructor, a gruff, retired Air Force veteran named Thomas Brennan, who looked at her application and said, "I do not care who you are or what you look like. I only care if you can fly." He became her mentor, her champion, and eventually, her friend. Denise earned her commercial pilot license, then her airline transport pilot certificate. She accumulated over 15,000 hours of flight time, flying everything from small Cessnas to massive Boeing jets. She became one of the few black women in America with an ATP rating, joining an elite club that numbered fewer than 150. But even with all her credentials, the discrimination never stopped. Passengers, who demanded different pilots when they saw her face. Co-pilots who questioned her decisions. Airlines that passed her over for promotions while advancing less qualified white men. She learned to document everything, to keep records, to build cases, and eventually, she realized that the only way to change the system was to work within it at the highest levels. 5 years ago, the Federal Aviation Administration recruited Denise to become a flight instructor examiner. It was one of the most prestigious positions in aviation safety, responsible for evaluating pilots and ensuring that airlines maintained the highest standards. She underwent rigorous training and testing, proving herself again and again until she earned the title of Senior FAA Flight Instructor Examiner. Now, she traveled the country, conducting inspections and evaluations, often undercover, to identify safety violations and instances of discrimination that airlines tried to hide. This morning, her target was Sky Eagle Airlines, a mid-sized carrier that operated primarily in the South and Southwest. Over the past 18 months, the FAA had received numerous complaints about the company. Flight attendants reported hostile work environments. Black and Latino employees claimed they were passed over for promotions, while less experienced white colleagues advanced. Most troubling were reports about certain senior pilots who openly made racist and sexist remarks, creating a culture of fear that prevented victims from speaking out. The complaints had piled up, but without concrete evidence, the FAA could not act. That was why Denise was here. She was to observe Sky Eagle's operations firsthand, gather evidence, and determine whether federal intervention was necessary. She dressed deliberately that morning, choosing dark jeans, a simple navy blue polo shirt, and comfortable walking shoes. No uniform, no badges visible, no indication that she was anything other than an ordinary traveler. She slipped her FAA credentials into an inside pocket of her lightweight jacket, along with her notepad and small digital recorder. Her boarding pass showed a business-class seat on Flight 1247 to Houston, departing at 7:15. She would blend in with the other passengers, observe how the crew treated people, and assess the airline's culture from the inside. As she gathered her belongings and headed for the door, Denise paused at the mirror. She saw a woman who had fought for everything she had. A woman who carried the legacy of her grandmother's courage and her father's dreams. She straightened her shoulders and took a deep breath. Whatever happened today, she was ready. Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport was already buzzing with activity when Denise arrived at 5:30. As one of the busiest airports in the world, it never truly slept. But the early morning hours had their own particular energy. Business travelers rushed past with rolling briefcases. Families herded sleepy children toward their gates. Airport employees moved with practiced efficiency, cleaning floors and restocking shops before the day's full chaos began. Denise made her way through security without incident and walked toward Gate 47, where Sky Eagle Flight 1247 was scheduled to depart. She observed everything as she walked. The diversity of the passengers, the demographics of the airport staff, the way people interacted with each other. She noticed immediately that while the airport employed people of all backgrounds, the Sky Eagle gate area told a different story. The two gate agents were both white. The pilot she glimpsed through the window, walking toward the aircraft, was white. The first officer beside him was also white. She made mental notes, cataloging her observations for her report. She took a seat near the window where she could watch the aircraft being prepared for departure. The Boeing 737 sat on the tarmac, its Sky Eagle logo gleaming in the early morning light. Ground crews loaded baggage, while fuel trucks topped off the tanks. Everything appeared normal, routine. But Denise knew that the real test would come when she stepped aboard that plane and saw how the crew treated her. In her experience, the truth about a company's culture revealed itself in small moments: a dismissive glance, an assumption based on appearance, a tone of voice that said you do not belong here. She had experienced all of these countless times, and she had learned to recognize them instantly. As she waited for boarding to begin, Denise pulled out her phone and reviewed the file on Captain Raymond Whitmore, the pilot assigned to today's flight. His record was extensive: 30 years with Sky Eagle, starting as a first officer and working his way up to senior captain. Excellent safety record, with no accidents or incidents. But buried in his personnel file were 12 separate complaints spanning the past decade. A flight attendant who accused him of making racially insensitive jokes, a black first officer who claimed Whitmore had undermined him in front of passengers, a Latina gate agent who reported that Whitmore had called her the wrong name repeatedly despite corrections, insisting that all Hispanic names sounded the same to him. Every complaint had been resolved internally with no disciplinary action. The pattern was clear. Sky Eagle protected its senior pilots, regardless of their behavior. Denise put her phone away as the boarding announcement began. It was time to see Captain Raymond Whitmore in action. Captain Raymond Whitmore strode through the Dallas-Fort Worth terminal like a man who owned the entire airport. At 58 years old, he carried himself with the confidence of someone who had spent 3 decades commanding the skies and expected the world to recognize his authority. His silver hair was perfectly groomed beneath his captain's hat, and his uniform was pressed to crisp perfection, every button gleaming, every insignia positioned exactly where it should be. He wore his aviator sunglasses even inside the terminal, a habit he had adopted years ago because he believed it made him look more impressive. People stepped aside as he passed, and he accepted their deference as his natural due. Raymond Whitmore came from a family of aviators. His grandfather had been a barnstormer in the 1,920 performing aerial stunts at county fairs across the Midwest. His father flew B-52 bombers during the Vietnam War, earning a Silver Star for a mission that remained classified to this day. Raymond had grown up on air bases, surrounded by men who spoke the language of flight as naturally as breathing. He had never doubted that he would follow in their footsteps, and he had never encountered an obstacle he could not overcome through sheer force of will and family connections. He remembered the early days of his career fondly, what he called the golden age of aviation. Back then, the cockpit was a sanctuary reserved for men who had earned their place through skill and dedication. There were no diversity quotas, no sensitivity training, no complaints about hostile work environments. Pilots were respected. Their word was law. If a crew member did not like how a captain ran his ship, that crew member found another line of work. It was simple. It was efficient. It was the way things should be. But the world had changed, and Raymond Whitmore resented every inch of that change. He watched as airlines hired female pilots and paraded them before the media as symbols of progress. He saw qualified white men passed over for promotions so that companies could meet diversity targets. He heard the way young people talked about inclusion and equity and systemic racism, and he thought they were soft, coddled, unwilling to earn their success the way he had earned his. He kept these opinions mostly to himself, sharing them only with trusted colleagues who felt the same way. But sometimes, when he was tired or frustrated or simply feeling superior, his true feelings slipped out. Walking beside him this morning was First Officer Bradley Coleman, a 32-year-old pilot who had recently been promoted to his position after 5 years of flying for Sky Eagle. Bradley was tall and lean, with sandy brown hair and an eager-to-please demeanor that sometimes bordered on obsequious. He had grown up in a middle-class Houston suburb, the son of an accountant and a school teacher, and he had dreamed of flying since childhood. Unlike Whitmore, Bradley had no family connections in aviation. He had earned his place through student loans and grinding work, and he was keenly aware of how precarious his position was. Sky Eagle was not known for giving second chances, and Bradley had seen promising careers end over minor mistakes or personality conflicts. So he kept his head down, followed orders, and tried not to make waves. Bradley knew that Captain Whitmore was not an easy man to work with. He had heard the stories from other first officers, tales of Whitmore's explosive temper and cutting remarks. He had witnessed firsthand the way Whitmore talked about female crew members when they were out of earshot, the jokes that were not really jokes, the comments that made Bradley uncomfortable but that he never challenged. He told himself that it was not his place to correct a senior captain. He told himself that Whitmore was from a different generation and did not know any better. He told himself all the things that people tell themselves when they choose silence over confrontation. But deep down, Bradley Coleman knew that his silence made him complicit. As they approached Gate 47, Whitmore was already in a foul mood. He had received an email that morning informing him that his quarterly evaluation was coming up, and he suspected that the company was finally going to address some of the complaints in his file. Not that he was worried. He had friends in management, fellow pilots who understood the pressures of the job and would protect their own. But the mere suggestion that his conduct needed reviewing irritated him. 30 years of perfect flights, and they wanted to question his professionalism because some oversensitive employees could not take a joke. Denise Harper was walking toward the gate when Whitmore first noticed her. She was approaching from the direction of the main terminal, moving with quiet confidence, a small backpack over one shoulder and a boarding pass in her hand. Whitmore's eyes swept over her automatically, making assumptions before she had even come within speaking distance. Black woman. Casual clothes. No uniform. No visible ID badge. In his mental framework, this placed her in one of two categories. Either she was a passenger who had wandered into the wrong area, or she was one of the lower-level airport staff. Cleaning crew, perhaps. Or catering. Or one of those diversity hires they were always bringing in to handle customer complaints. He watched as she continued walking toward the jet bridge, and something about her bearing bothered him. She moved with too much confidence, as if she had every right to be there. She did not look around uncertainly, or check her boarding pass repeatedly like passengers who were unsure of their gates. She walked like someone who knew exactly where she was going, and expected no one to stop her. This irritated Whitmore in ways he could not quite articulate. In his experience, people needed to know their place. They needed to defer to authority. And this woman showed no deference at all. "Hey," he called out, stepping into her path. His voice was loud enough to carry, commanding attention from everyone in the immediate area. "Hey, you, where do you think you are going?" Denise stopped and looked at him calmly. She had been expecting something like this. The complaints about Sky Eagle were not exaggerated, it seemed. "Excuse me," she said, her voice neutral and polite. Whitmore planted himself in front of her, arms crossed over his chest. Bradley Coleman stood a few feet behind him, looking uncomfortable but saying nothing. "I asked you a question," Whitmore said. Whitmore said. Whitmore said. And quote more. Whitmore said. Whitmore said. "This area is for flight crew only. Cleaning staff uses the service entrance around back." Denise felt the familiar tightening in her chest, the mixture of anger and resignation that came with being misjudged based on her appearance. But she had been through this too many times to let it show. Her face remained composed, her voice steady. "I am not cleaning staff," she said simply. Whitmore's eyes narrowed. He looked her up and down again, reassessing. "Flight attendant, then? New hire? You are supposed to be in uniform." Did no one tell you the dress code? I am not a flight attendant either. Now, Whitmore was growing impatient. He did not like being contradicted, especially by someone he had already categorized as beneath him. Then what exactly are you doing in this area? This is a restricted zone for Sky Eagle personnel. If you are a passenger, the boarding area is over there. He jerked his thumb toward the gate seating, not bothering to hide his condescension. I have business on this aircraft, Denise said. She could feel the eyes of other people on them now. Gate agents at their podium, pretending not to watch. Passengers in the waiting area, craning their necks to see what was happening. A few people had already pulled out their phones, perhaps sensing that this encounter might become something worth recording. Whitmore's expression hardened. In his 30 years of flying, he had developed what he thought of as instincts about people. He could tell when someone was lying, when someone was hiding something, when someone did not belong, and everything about this woman set off alarms in his head. She was too calm, too self-assured, too unwilling to explain herself. Normal people got flustered when confronted by authority. They apologized, showed their credentials, explained themselves. This woman just stood there, looking at him like he was the one who needed to justify his presence. Business on this aircraft, he repeated sarcastically. And what business would that be? What could you possibly have to do on my plane? Bradley Coleman shifted his weight from one foot to the other. He knew this was escalating in a bad direction. He could see the way other people were watching, could feel the tension building in the air. Part of him wanted to intervene, to suggest that they just let the woman show her boarding pass and be done with it. But the other part of him, the part that had learned to survive by not challenging Captain Whitmore, kept him silent. He looked at the ground and said nothing. Denise recognized the dynamic immediately. She had seen it countless times. The aggressive authority figure and the silent bystander. The bully and the enabler. She noted Bradley Coleman's discomfort and his unwillingness to speak up. Another data point for her report. I think there has been a misunderstanding, she said carefully. If you would just let me pass, I will be on my way. But Whitmore was not finished. He felt that his authority had been challenged, and he was not going to let this woman walk away without putting her in her place. You are not going anywhere until you tell me who you are and why you are trying to access my aircraft, he said, his voice rising. He turned to Bradley. Coleman, call security. We have an unauthorized person trying to board. Denise felt her jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. She could end this now. She could pull out her FAA credentials and watch Whitmore's face transform from arrogance to panic. But that would defeat the purpose of her undercover observation. She was here to see how Sky Eagle employees behaved when they did not know they were being watched. And right now, she was getting exactly the evidence she needed. That is not necessary, she said. I have a valid boarding pass for this flight. Business class, seat 4A. I am a paying passenger. Whitmore laughed, a harsh sound without any real humor. Business class? Right. And I suppose you just happened to wander up to the restricted crew area instead of waiting at the gate like everyone else. I wanted to observe the pre-flight preparations. It interests me. It interests you, Whitmore repeated mockingly. Well, here is what interests me. Keeping unauthorized people off my aircraft. So you can either go back to the gate and wait like a normal passenger, or you can explain to security why you were trying to sneak into a restricted area. A gate agent hurried over, looking nervous. She was a young white woman with blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail, and she clearly wanted nothing more than to defuse this situation and make everyone happy. Captain Whitmore, is everything okay here? Can I help with something? This woman claims she is a business class passenger, but she was trying to access the aircraft through the crew area. I want her credentials verified. The gate agent turned to Denise with an apologetic expression. "Mom, may I see your boarding pass and identification, please?" Denise handed over her boarding pass and her driver's license, deliberately keeping her FAA credentials hidden. The gate agent scanned the boarding pass and checked the ID, and her face relaxed visibly. "Everything checks out, Captain. She is booked in business class under Denise Harper. The booking was made through our website 2 weeks ago." Whitmore should have let it go then. Any reasonable person would have accepted the verification and moved on. But Raymond Whitmore was not feeling reasonable. Something about this woman continued to bother him, something he could not quite put into words. Maybe it was the way she had not backed down. Maybe it was her refusal to be intimidated. Or maybe it was simply that she was a black woman who did not seem to know her place. Whatever the reason, he was not ready to let this end. "Fine," he said. But his tone made it clear that nothing was fine. "She can board with the other passengers when boarding is announced, but she stays out of restricted areas. I do not care what interests her." He turned away dismissively, then paused and looked back over his shoulder. "And tell her next time she should dress appropriately for business class. This is not a bus station." Denise watched him walk toward the jet bridge, Bradley Coleman trailing behind like an obedient shadow. She noted the way the gate agent avoided her eyes, embarrassed by her captain's behavior but unwilling to say anything. She noted the passengers who quickly looked away when she turned in their direction, not wanting to get involved. She noted everything because noting things was what she did, and because every detail would become part of the record that would eventually bring Raymond Whitmore's world crashing down. But she was not finished observing yet. And apparently, neither was Captain Whitmore. The next 20 minutes should have passed uneventfully. Denise returned to the gate area and took a seat near the window, her notebook open in her lap as she pretended to review work documents while actually recording her observations. Captain Whitmore and First Officer Coleman had disappeared down the jet bridge to conduct their pre-flight preparations. The gate agent made periodic announcements about the boarding process. Passengers gathered their belongings and formed the unofficial line that always develops near the boarding door. Everything appeared normal. But then, Whitmore reappeared. He came striding back into the gate area with a purpose that immediately attracted attention. His face was set in an expression of righteous determination, and he was looking directly at Denise. Behind him, Bradley Coleman followed with obvious reluctance, his discomfort visible in every step. 2 airport security officers flanked them, one older and weary-looking, the other young and eager. Denise recognized this pattern. It was not enough for Whitmore that she had been verified as a legitimate passenger. He felt that his authority had been challenged, and he needed to reassert it in the most public way possible. She closed her notebook calmly and waited for him to reach her. "Mom, these officers need to ask you some questions," Whitmore announced, loud enough for everyone in the gate area to hear. His voice dripped with false concern, as if he were simply looking out for the safety of his passengers and crew. "There have been some concerns about your behavior, and we need to clear them up before anyone can board." The older security officer, whose name tag identified him as Miller, looked like he would rather be anywhere else. He had clearly been doing this job long enough to recognize a situation being escalated unnecessarily. But his younger partner, Jenkins, approached with an enthusiasm that bordered on aggression. "Mom, I need to see some identification," Jenkins said, already reaching for the radio on his belt as if prepared to call for backup at any moment. "We have received reports that you were attempting to access restricted areas without authorization." Denise remained seated, looking up at the small crowd that had gathered around her. "I have already shown my identification and boarding pass to the gate agent," she said, keeping her voice calm and clear. "She verified that I am a legitimate passenger on this flight. We need to verify it again," Jenkins insisted. "Standard security protocol." Denise pulled out her driver's license and boarding pass for the second time and handed them over. Miller took them with a resigned expression and examined them carefully, then pulled out his radio to call someone for verification. The gate area had grown quiet as passengers watched the scene unfold. Several people had their phones out, recording. "The boarding pass is valid," Miller confirmed after a moment. "She is booked in business class. Everything checks out." But Whitmore was not satisfied. "Check if the payment went through," he said. "Sometimes these tickets are purchased with stolen credit cards, especially for business class." He let the implication hang in the air, heavy and unmistakable. Miller's expression flickered with something that might have been distaste, but he complied, making another call. The wait stretched out as Denise sat perfectly still, aware that every eye in the gate area was on her. She could feel the weight of judgment from some observers, sympathy from others, uncomfortable neutrality from most. This was the experience of being black in America, she thought. Being forced to prove your legitimacy over and over again while white people who looked like they belonged moved through the world without question. "Payment is verified," Miller finally said. The ticket was purchased with a credit card registered to Denise Harper at an address in Washington, D.C. "There are no issues with the transaction." A woman in the crowd spoke up then. An older white woman with silver hair and an expensive-looking coat. "This is ridiculous," she said loudly. "Leave that poor woman alone. She has a valid ticket. What more do you need?" Whitmore turned toward the woman with a forced smile. "Mom, this is a security matter. I am sure you understand that we need to take every precaution to keep our passengers safe. I understand that you are harassing someone because of how she looks." The woman shot back. "I have been flying for 40 years, and I have never seen anything like this." A murmur of agreement rippled through some of the watching passengers, but others remained silent, looking away, determined not to get involved. A man in a business suit muttered something about just wanting to board so they could leave on time. A young mother pulled her children closer and turned them away from the scene. Whitmore felt the tide of public opinion shifting, but he was not ready to back down. He had committed too fully to this confrontation, and walking away now would feel like defeat. He needed to find some way to reassert his authority, to prove that he had been right to question this woman. "Fine," he said, his voice tight, with barely contained frustration. "If she is a legitimate passenger, then she can board with everyone else when the time comes. But I want it noted that I had concerns about her behavior, and I expect security to keep an eye on her during the flight." He should have left it there. He should have walked back to his aircraft and prepared for departure, and let the whole incident fade into an unpleasant memory. But Raymond Whitmore had never been good at knowing when to stop. He turned back to Denise, who was still sitting calmly in her seat, and something about her composure infuriated him. She should have been apologetic, grateful that she was being allowed to board despite his concerns. She should have been embarrassed by all the attention. But she just sat there, looking at him with those steady dark eyes, and he could not stand it. "You know what?" he said, stepping closer to her. "You seem so interested in aircraft operations. Maybe you would like a closer look at how things work." His voice took on a mocking tone. "Here is what you can do. When you board, before you take your fancy business class seat, you can make yourself useful. The cockpit could use a good cleaning. There is a trash bag that needs emptying and some surfaces that need wiping down. Why do you not handle that for us?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled paper bag, some leftover trash from his breakfast that he had been carrying without thinking. He tossed it at Dennis's feet. "There you go. Start with that. Then head up to the cockpit and tidy up. The people who actually belong in that space have real work to do." The gate area fell completely silent. Even the passengers who had been trying to stay out of it looked up in shock. The older security officer, Miller, closed his eyes briefly and shook his head almost imperceptibly. The gate agent's mouth hung open. Bradley Coleman stared at the floor as if hoping it would open up and swallow him. Denise looked at the crumpled bag at her feet, then up at Captain Whitmore. Their eyes met, and in that moment, she made a decision. She had gathered enough evidence. She had witnessed and recorded multiple instances of discriminatory behavior. She had given Whitmore every opportunity to correct course, and he had only escalated further. There was no more value in remaining undercover. It was time to show him who she really was. She did not move for a long moment. The silence stretched and stretched, filled with tension so thick, it seemed to press against the walls. Everyone was waiting to see what she would do. Would she pick up the trash as commanded? Would she argue? Would she cry? Slowly, deliberately, Denise reached into the inside pocket of her jacket. Whitmore's eyes followed her movement, and for a moment, he looked almost triumphant, as if he expected her to finally show some document that would prove she did not belong here after all. But what she pulled out was not what he expected. The FAA credentials gleamed under the fluorescent lights. The official seal of the Federal Aviation Administration was embossed in gold. The photograph showed Denise Harper in a professional portrait, wearing a dark blazer, looking directly at the camera with the same steady gaze she now fixed on Captain Whitmore. The words on the badge read, Denise M. Harper, Senior FAA Flight Instructor Examiner, Federal Aviation Administration, and in that moment, everything changed. Captain Raymond Whitmore stared at the badge in Denise's hand as if it were a poisonous snake that had suddenly appeared in his path. The gold seal of the Federal Aviation Administration caught the light, and the words Senior FAA Flight Instructor Examiner seemed to grow larger and more threatening with each passing second. His face went through a rapid transformation, from confusion to recognition to dawning horror, all in the space of a few heartbeats. Denise rose to her feet slowly, holding the badge where everyone could see it. Her voice, when she spoke, carried across the entire gate area with quiet authority. Captain Whitmore, my name is Denise Harper. I am a Senior Flight Instructor Examiner with the Federal Aviation Administration. I was sent here to evaluate the operations of Sky Eagle Airlines in response to numerous complaints about safety violations and discriminatory practices. She paused, letting the words sink in. Around them, the murmur of the crowd had become a buzz of astonished whispers. Phones that had been recording the confrontation were now capturing something far more dramatic than anyone had expected. The security officers stepped back instinctively, as if distancing themselves from Whitmore. I had hoped to observe your airline's procedures without revealing my identity, Denise continued. I wanted to see how your crew behaved when they believed no one was watching. And I must say, Captain, what I have witnessed in the past 30 minutes is the most egregious display of racial discrimination I have encountered in my 15 years with the FAA. Whitmore's mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. His face had gone from red to white, and a thin sheen of sweat had appeared on his forehead. He looked like a man who had just watched his entire life flash before his eyes and did not like what he saw. This is a misunderstanding, he finally managed to say. His voice had lost all its previous authority, coming out thin and reedy. I did not know who you were. If you had just told me from the beginning, why should I have needed to tell you anything? Denise interrupted. I showed you a valid boarding pass. The gate agent verified my ticket. The security officers confirmed my identification and payment. I did nothing wrong. The only reason you continued to harass me was because of how I look. That is not true. Whitmore protested, but his voice lacked conviction. I was just concerned about security. Anyone would have done the same thing, would they? Denise looked around at the watching crowd. Did you ask any of the white passengers in business class to clean your cockpit? Did you demand that security verify their credit cards? Did you throw trash at their feet? Whitmore had no answer. He looked around desperately, searching for someone to support him, but found only averted gazes and shaking heads. Even Bradley Coleman, who had followed him faithfully all morning, was staring at the floor like he wished he could disappear. Flight 1247 will not be departing on schedule this morning, Denise announced. I need to conduct a formal investigation into what has occurred here. Captain Whitmore, First Officer Coleman, you will both remain at the gate for questioning. I am going to contact my superiors at the FAA regional office immediately. She pulled out her phone and began making calls. The first was to Director Patricia Hayes at the FAA's Southwest Regional Office. The second was to the Sky Eagle Airlines corporate headquarters, demanding that a senior company representative come to the airport immediately. The third was to Document Control, requesting that all personnel files related to Captain Whitmore be preserved and made available for review. As she made these calls, the atmosphere in the gate area shifted dramatically. Word was spreading through the airport about what had happened. Employees from other airlines drifted over to see what the commotion was about. A reporter from a local news station who happened to be traveling that day recognized a story when she saw one and began making her own calls. Within minutes, what had been a confrontation between a pilot and a passenger had become something much larger. Whitmore stood frozen in place, watching his world crumble around him. He had spent 30 years building his career, accumulating seniority and respect and authority. He had believed himself untouchable, protected by his experience and his connections and the unspoken rules that governed his industry. Now all of that was collapsing like a house of cards in a hurricane. First, Officer Bradley Coleman felt sick to his stomach. He kept replaying the morning's events in his mind, seeing all the moments when he could have spoken up, when he could have suggested that they just let the woman board in peace. But he had said nothing. He had followed Whitmore's lead, even when he knew it was wrong. And now he was going to have to explain his silence to federal investigators. The gate agent was crying softly at her podium, overwhelmed by what had happened. The security officers had retreated to a corner and were engaged in urgent conversation, probably trying to figure out how to explain their role in all of this. The passengers were divided between those who wanted to stay and see what happened next and those who just wanted to get on a different flight and get away from the chaos. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think Captain Whitmore got what he deserved? Comment the number 1 if you believe his behavior was unacceptable and he should face consequences. Comment the number 2 if you think Denise should have identified herself earlier to avoid the confrontation. And comment the number 3 if you have ever experienced or witnessed something similar in your own life. Your stories matter, and I want to hear them. Also, do not forget to hit that like button if you are enjoying this story, and subscribe to the channel if you have not already. We have so much more to come. But here is what I need you to think about. Captain Whitmore clearly had power in this situation. He had the uniform, the authority, the backing of airport security. He had 30 years of experience and the confidence that came with it. So why did he feel the need to humiliate a woman he had never met before? What drives someone to treat another human being with such contempt based on nothing more than the color of their skin? And what about First Officer Coleman? He knew what was happening was wrong. You could see it in his face, in the way he looked away, in his obvious discomfort. But he said nothing. He did not intervene. He did not suggest that they just let Denise board. Is silence in the face of injustice the same as participation? Does his failure to speak up make him as guilty as Whitmore? These are the questions that will shape what happens next. Because this story is far from over. The FAA investigation is about to reveal secrets that Sky Eagle Airlines has been hiding for years. And the consequences will be more far-reaching than anyone at that airport could have imagined. Stay with me. While the chaos continued at Gate 47, Denise found a quiet corner of the airport where she could wait for the FAA team to arrive. The initial shock of her revelation had given way to the more tedious work of documentation and coordination. She had made her calls, set the investigation in motion, And now there was nothing to do but wait and reflect. She pulled up a chair near a window overlooking the tarmac and watched the planes taxi past. Somewhere out there, in the clear Texas sky, other pilots were doing the work she had once done, carrying passengers safely from one city to another. She missed flying sometimes, missed the pure freedom of leaving the ground behind, of existing for a few hours in a world where the troubles of Earth seemed small and distant. But she had made her choice years ago. She could do more good from within the system than she could from 30,000 feet. Her mind drifted back to her childhood, to the small house in Montgomery where she had grown up surrounded by history. Her grandmother Rosetta's photograph still hung in Denise's apartment in Washington, D.C., a formal portrait taken in 1955, the year of the bus boycott. In the picture, Rosetta wore her Sunday best, her chin lifted with quiet pride, her eyes meeting the camera with the same steady gaze that Denise had inherited. Rosetta had walked to work for 381 days, rather than ride a segregated bus. She had worn out 3 pairs of shoes. She had faced jeers and threats, and the constant exhaustion of fighting a battle that many said could not be won. But she had never backed down. And in the end, she and thousands of others had broken the system that tried to break them. Denise thought about her father, Luther, and the stories he used to tell about his early days in the Air Force. He had been one of the first black pilots to fly cargo missions in the years after integration, and he had faced resistance at every turn, commanding officers who gave him the worst routes, fellow pilots who refused to share a cockpit with him, mechanics who suddenly could not find time to service his aircraft. He had documented everything, kept meticulous records, and reported every incident through the proper channels. Most of his complaints went nowhere, but he kept flying, kept proving himself, kept showing up day after day until even his harshest critics had to admit that he was one of the best pilots they had ever seen. The memory that hurt the most was his final days in the hospital. The lung cancer had spread everywhere by then, and the doctors had stopped talking about treatment and started talking about comfort. Luther Harper lay in his bed, thinner than Denise had ever seen him, his once strong hands trembling against the sheets. But his eyes were still clear, still full of the fire that had carried him through a lifetime of obstacles. "I am not afraid to die," he had told her during one of their last conversations. "I have had a good life. I have flown higher than my father ever dreamed, and I have raised a daughter who will fly higher still. But I need you to promise me something, baby girl." Denise had taken his hand, trying not to cry. "Anything, Daddy. Promise me you will not let them win. The people who say you do not belong, the ones who look at you and see only your skin, they want you to give up. They want you to get tired and angry, and make mistakes they can point to as proof that they were right all along. Do not give them that satisfaction. You be twice as good, twice as calm, twice as prepared. And when they come for you, and they will come for you, you stand your ground. You show them what a Harper is made of." She had promised. She had held his hand until he fell asleep, and she had kept that promise every day since. The years after his death had been hard. Her mother Dorothy worked double shifts at the hospital, coming home exhausted but still finding time to check Denise's homework and ask about her day. There was never enough money for extras. But somehow, Dorothy made sure that Denise's dream of flying never faded. When Denise started saving for flight school, Dorothy quietly added to the fund whenever she could spare a few dollars. When the first flight instructor refused to teach her, Dorothy helped her find another. And when Denise finally earned her pilot's license, Dorothy was there on the tarmac, crying tears of joy as her daughter climbed out of the cockpit. Flight school itself had been an education in resilience. Denise was often the only black woman in her classes, and sometimes the only black person at all. Some of her fellow students accepted her without question, judging her only by her abilities. But others made their prejudice clear through small cruelties and casual exclusions. They formed study groups without inviting her. They paired off for practice flights with anyone but her. They made jokes when she was just barely out of earshot. Jokes she was not supposed to hear, but always did. Her breakthrough came with Thomas Brennan, the retired Air Force veteran, who became her primary instructor. Brennan was a gruff man in his 60s, white-haired and weather-beaten, with a reputation for being impossible to please. He had trained hundreds of pilots over his career, and he had no patience for excuses or mediocrity. When Denise first sat across from him in his cramped office, she expected the same resistance she had encountered everywhere else. Instead, Brennan looked at her application, then looked at her, then looked back at the application. "You have good grades," he said. "Good scores on the entrance exams. Your references say you are hard-working and dedicated." He set the papers down. "I do not care what color you are or what is between your legs. I only care whether you can fly. Can you fly?" "Yes, sir," Denise had answered. "I can fly." "Then prove it." She spent the next 18 months proving it. Brennan pushed her harder than he pushed any of his other students, and at first she resented it. But gradually she realized that his tough approach came from respect, not prejudice. He believed she could handle more, so he gave her more. He treated her like a pilot, not like a diversity case to be coddled. And when she finally earned her commercial license, he shook her hand and said, "You are going to do great things, Harper. Do not let anyone tell you different." Thomas Brennan had died 5 years ago, but Denise still kept a photograph of him in her office. He had taught her that true respect meant holding people to high standards, not making excuses for them. He had shown her that allies could come from unexpected places, and that judging people by their appearance worked both ways. Now, sitting in the Dallas airport waiting for the investigation to begin, Denise thought about all the confrontations she had faced over the years. The passengers who demanded different pilots, the co-workers who questioned her decisions, the supervisors who passed her over for promotions. She had responded to each challenge the same way, with documentation, with professionalism, with the calm, steady gaze she had inherited from her grandmother and father. She never gave them the satisfaction of seeing her angry or defeated. She just kept flying, kept climbing, kept proving that she belonged. Captain Whitmore thought he had power over her this morning. He thought his uniform and his authority and his white skin gave him the right to humiliate her. But he did not understand what real power looked like. Real power was not about intimidation or control. Real power was the ability to stand firm in who you are, no matter what anyone tries to take from you. Rosetta had taught her that. Luther had taught her that. And now Denise was going to teach it to Raymond Whitmore. She looked out at the planes on the tarmac and smiled slightly. Her father had asked her to fly higher than he ever could. Today, she was doing exactly that. 3 hours after Denise revealed her identity, the Gate 47 area of Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport had been transformed into an impromptu command center. Yellow tape blocked access to the jet bridge and the Sky Eagle aircraft. Representatives from multiple agencies moved through the space, conducting interviews and collecting evidence. Passengers who had witnessed the confrontation had been asked to provide statements before being rebooked on other flights. The story was already spreading through social media, hashtags multiplying like wildfire. Director Patricia Hayes arrived first, flying in from the FAA's Southwest Regional Office in Fort Worth on a government helicopter. Hayes was 55 years old, a career bureaucrat who had worked her way up through the ranks of federal aviation regulation. She was white, silver-haired, and possessed of a reputation for absolute integrity. When she walked into a room, people paid attention. With her came Senior Investigator Marcus Thompson, a 48-year-old black man who specialized in cases involving discrimination and workplace misconduct. Thompson had spent 20 years documenting the ways that bias could compromise safety in the aviation industry. And he had seen enough to know that Captain Whitmore's behavior was likely just the tip of a very large iceberg. The third member of the FAA team was Jennifer Martinez, a 40-year-old attorney of Latina descent who served as the agency's legal counsel for the region. Martinez had a sharp mind and a sharper tongue, and she was already drafting the legal framework for what promised to be a complex investigation. Denise briefed them in a private conference room, commandeered from Sky Eagle's administrative offices. She walked them through the morning's events in precise detail, from her first encounter with Whitmore to his final demand that she clean the cockpit. She played the audio recording from her digital recorder, which had captured every word of the confrontation, and she showed them the cell phone videos that passengers had provided, offering multiple angles on Whitmore's discriminatory behavior. Director Hayes listened with an expression of barely contained fury. "This is bad," she said when Denise finished. "This is very, very bad. For Sky Eagle, for the industry, for everyone. It gets worse," Denise replied. "I reviewed Captain Whitmore's personnel file before I came here. There are 12 previous complaints against him, spanning the last decade. All of them were resolved internally with no disciplinary action." Marcus Thompson leaned forward. 12 complaints? And the airline did nothing. Nothing of substance. The complaints came from flight attendants, first officers, gate agents, black employees, Latino employees, women. They all described similar patterns of behavior: racist jokes, demeaning comments, hostile work environment. But every time, the company found a way to make the complaint go away. Jennifer Martinez was already taking notes. "We need those files. All of them. Every complaint, every investigation, every internal memo. If Sky Eagle has been systematically covering up discriminatory behavior by a senior pilot, that is a major violation of federal regulations." "It is more than that," Denise said. "It is a safety issue. A pilot who feels entitled to treat his crew members with contempt is a pilot who might ignore their input in a crisis." Captain Whitmore's attitude does not just create a hostile work environment. It creates conditions where people are afraid to speak up, even when lives might be at stake. Director Hayes nodded grimly. "Start the investigation immediately. I want everyone interviewed. The captain, the first officer, the gate agents, the security officers, the witnesses. I want every document Sky Eagle has on Captain Whitmore and anyone who protected him. And I want a preliminary report on my desk by the end of the week." The investigation moved quickly. Marcus Thompson set up shop in another conference room, conducting interviews one by one. The passengers who had witnessed the confrontation were eager to share their stories, their outrage evident in their voices and their detailed recollections. The cell phone videos were collected and cataloged, providing irrefutable documentation of what had occurred. The Sky Eagle employees were more reluctant. The gate agent, whose name was Megan Holloway, was clearly terrified of losing her job. She answered questions in monosyllables until Thompson assured her that the FAA would protect her from retaliation. Then the floodgates opened. She described a culture of fear at Sky Eagle, where complaints about senior pilots were quietly discouraged, and employees who spoke up found their careers mysteriously stalled. "Everyone knows Captain Whitmore is like this," Megan said, her voice shaking. "He treats flight attendants like servants. He makes comments about women and minorities all the time. But when anyone complains, the company just moves them to a different route or gives them a small raise to keep quiet. Nothing ever changes." The security officers told similar stories. Officer Miller, the older one, admitted that he had suspected Whitmore was overreacting from the beginning. "I have been doing this job for 20 years, he said. "I know the difference between a legitimate security concern and a power trip. This was a power trip. But what was I supposed to do? He is a senior captain. He has authority over that aircraft. First, Officer Bradley Coleman was the hardest interview. He sat in the conference room with his head in his hands, looking like a man who had watched his career collapse in slow motion. When Thompson asked him about the morning's events, Coleman initially tried to defend his silence. "I did not know it was going to escalate like that," he said. "I thought the captain was just being cautious. I did not realize." "You did not realize he was being racist," Thompson interrupted. "Or you did not want to see it." Coleman was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. I knew from the moment he stopped her. I have flown with Captain Whitmore for 2 years. I have heard him make comments about black passengers, about female crew members, about anyone who is not like him. I knew exactly what he was doing. Then why did you not say anything? Because I was afraid. Coleman looked up, his eyes red. I have worked so hard to get where I am. I do not have family connections. I do not have a backup plan. If I challenged a senior captain and got blacklisted, my career would be over. So I just kept quiet and told myself it was not my problem. Thompson nodded slowly. And how does that feel now? Coleman laughed bitterly. Like I sold my soul for a job I might not even have anymore. The investigation uncovered more than anyone had expected. When Jennifer Martinez subpoenaed Sky Eagle's internal communications, she found a paper trail that stretched back years. Emails between human resources managers discussing how to quietly settle complaints against Whitmore. Memos from senior executives warning that any public scandal involving a veteran pilot could damage the company's reputation. A particularly damning message from the CEO, Robert Harrison, to the head of HR. Whitmore is a pain, but he is also our most experienced captain. Find a way to make this go away. The evidence painted a picture of systematic institutional failure. Sky Eagle had known about Captain Whitmore's behavior for years. They had received complaint after complaint. They had documentation of his discriminatory remarks and actions. And they had chosen, repeatedly, to protect him rather than hold him accountable. This is not just about one pilot anymore, Director Hayes said as she reviewed the evidence. This is about an entire corporate culture that enabled and protected discriminatory behavior. Sky Eagle Airlines is going to face serious consequences. The preliminary findings were enough to justify immediate action. The FAA issued an emergency order suspending Captain Whitmore's pilot certificate pending the outcome of the investigation. First Officer Coleman was placed on administrative leave, and Sky Eagle Airlines was notified that they faced potential penalties, including substantial fines and the possible suspension of their operating certificate. But the biggest surprise was still to come. As investigators continued to dig through Sky Eagle's records, they found something that would turn the entire case into a national scandal. The formal interview with Captain Raymond Whitmore took place in a small conference room at the airport, 3 hours after Denise Harper revealed her identity. The room was deliberately sparse, just a table, 4 chairs, and a recording device that captured every word. Whitmore sat on one side, looking diminished without his captain's hat and with his uniform jacket draped over the back of his chair. His lawyer, a company attorney named Douglas Chen, who had been hastily summoned from Sky Eagle's legal department, sat beside him with a yellow legal pad full of notes. On the other side of the table sat Director Patricia Hayes and Senior Investigator Marcus Thompson. Denise Harper was also present, seated slightly apart from the others, there as an observer rather than a participant. She watched Whitmore with the same steady gaze she had maintained throughout their confrontation that morning. Captain Whitmore, do you understand why you are here? Director Hayes began. There has been a misunderstanding, Whitmore said. His voice had lost its earlier authority, sounding defensive and uncertain. I did not know who that woman was. If she had just identified herself from the beginning, none of this would have happened. That woman, Hayes repeated, her tone sharpening, is Senior FAA Flight Instructor Examiner Denise Harper. She has more hours in the air than most pilots half your age. She did not need to identify herself to you. She had already shown valid credentials as a paying passenger. The question is not what she should have done. The question is why you treated her the way you did. Whitmore's lawyer leaned in. My client has cooperated fully with this investigation. He acknowledges that the situation could have been handled differently, but his actions were motivated by legitimate security concerns, not by any discriminatory intent. Legitimate security concerns, Thompson said flatly. He opened a folder and spread several photographs across the table. Captain, these are stills from cell phone videos taken this morning. In this one, you are blocking Miss Harper's path. In this one, you are calling for security while she stands calmly showing her boarding pass. And in this one, you are throwing trash at her feet and telling her to clean your cockpit. The photographs were damning. Whitmore looked at them and then looked away. Let me ask you something, Thompson continued. In your 30 years of flying, have you ever demanded that a white passenger clean your cockpit? Whitmore was silent. Have you ever called security on a white passenger who had already shown valid identification? Still silent. Have you ever implied that a white passenger might have purchased their ticket with a stolen credit card? Whitmore's lawyer tried to intervene. Captain Whitmore is not required to answer questions designed to put words in his mouth. He is not required to answer anything. Hayes agreed. But his silence speaks volumes. She leaned forward. Captain, we have access to your complete personnel file. We know about the 12 previous complaints against you. We know that Sky Eagle has been covering for you for years. The only question now is whether you can offer any explanation that might mitigate the consequences you are facing. Whitmore looked at his lawyer, then back at the investigators. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. I did not mean for it to happen like this. Then, what did you mean? Thompson asked. I saw a black woman in casual clothes walking toward my aircraft like she owned the place. And something about that just bothered me. I could not explain it then, and I cannot explain it now. But I knew, somewhere in my gut, that she did not belong there. So I stopped her. Because she was black, Thompson said. It was not a question. Whitmore hesitated, then nodded almost imperceptibly. I have been flying for 30 years. In all that time, I have seen maybe 5 black pilots. 5. Out of thousands. So when I see a black woman walking toward my cockpit, like she has every right to be there, my brain it does not compute. I know that sounds bad. I know it is wrong. But I am telling you the truth. Thompson exchanged a look with Hayes. This was more honesty than they had expected. The truth, Hayes said slowly, is that you allowed your prejudices to override your professional judgment. You saw a black woman and assumed she could not possibly be a passenger, let alone a federal official. You harassed her, humiliated her, and when she refused to back down, you escalated the confrontation to the point of demanding that she perform menial labor. All of this was captured on video. All of this occurred in front of dozens of witnesses. And all of this happened because you could not accept that a black woman might belong in your world. They played the cell phone videos then. Whitmore watched himself on the screen, saw himself through the eyes of the passengers who had recorded the confrontation. He heard his own voice, dripping with condescension. He saw the crumpled trash bags sailing through the air. He watched Denise stand her ground with a dignity that made his behavior look even more shameful by comparison. When the videos ended, Whitmore sat in silence. His face had aged 10 years in the past few hours. What is going to happen to me? He finally asked. Your pilot certificate is already suspended, Hayes informed him. Pending the outcome of our investigation, You will not be permitted to fly any aircraft. If the investigation confirms what we have seen today, the suspension will become permanent. You will never fly again." The words hit Whitmore like a physical blow. Flying was not just his career. It was his identity, his family legacy, his entire sense of self. Without it, he did not know who he was. 30 years, he said, more to himself than to anyone else. 30 years, and it all ends like this. It ends like this, Hayes agreed, because you chose to treat another human being with contempt based on the color of her skin. You had every opportunity to correct course. When your first officer stood beside you in uncomfortable silence, you could have listened to your better judgment. When the gate agent verified her ticket, you could have let it go. When the security officers confirmed her identity, you could have apologized and moved on. Instead, you chose to escalate. You chose to humiliate. You chose to throw trash at a federal official and demand that she clean your cockpit. These were your choices, Captain. Now you will live with the consequences. Denise Harper spoke then for the first time since the interview began. Her voice was calm, without anger or triumph. "Captain Whitmore, my father was a pilot. He served in the Air Force for 25 years, flying missions all over the world. He faced men like you every single day of his career. Men who told him he did not belong, who questioned his abilities, who made his life difficult at every turn. But he never gave up, and he never became bitter. He used to tell me that the sky has no color. Up there, everyone is equal." She paused, meeting his eyes. "I do not hate you, Captain. I feel sorry for you. You have spent 30 years in a world that is changing, and you refused to change with it. You held on to beliefs that hurt other people, beliefs that diminished your own humanity. And now those beliefs have cost you everything." Whitmore had no response. He sat in silence as the interview concluded. As his lawyer gathered papers and prepared to escort him out, he walked past the waiting media without a word, got into a company car, and disappeared into the Texas afternoon. His 30-year career was over. His reputation was destroyed. And all because he could not see past the color of a woman's skin to the credentials she carried in her pocket. In the weeks following the incident at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, the ripples of what had happened spread far beyond Gate 47. The cell phone videos went viral within hours, viewed millions of times across every social media platform. The hashtag number Justice for Denise trended worldwide. News networks ran the story on loop, analyzing every frame of the footage, interviewing witnesses and aviation experts, debating the larger implications for the airline industry. Captain Raymond Whitmore's pilot certificate was formally revoked by the FAA 30 days after the incident. The action was permanent and irreversible. He was banned from flying any aircraft, commercial or private, for the rest of his life. Additionally, he was placed on a federal no-hire list that would prevent him from working in any capacity within the aviation industry. The career he had spent 30 years building was erased as completely as if it had never existed. But Whitmore was not the only one to face consequences. The FAA's investigation into Sky Eagle Airlines uncovered a pattern of institutional negligence that went far deeper than anyone had expected. The 12 previous complaints against Whitmore were just the beginning. Investigators found documentation of similar issues with other pilots, flight attendants, and ground personnel. They found evidence that the company had systematically discouraged employees from filing discrimination complaints, offering hush money and reassignments instead of addressing underlying problems. The FAA levied a fine of $2.5 million against Sky Eagle Airlines, one of the largest penalties ever imposed for civil rights violations in the aviation industry. More significantly, the agency mandated sweeping changes to the company's policies and practices. All employees would be required to undergo comprehensive diversity and inclusion training. The Human Resources Department would be restructured under federal oversight. An independent ombudsman would be appointed to handle future complaints, with direct reporting authority to the FAA. CEO Robert Harrison, whose emails had revealed his complicity in covering up Whitmore's behavior, was forced to resign by Sky Eagle's board of directors. 3 senior managers in the Human Resources and Operations departments were also terminated. The company issued a public apology that was widely criticized as too little, too late. First Officer Bradley Coleman received a 6-month suspension and was required to complete extensive training on bystander intervention and ethical leadership before being allowed to return to flying. The investigation had determined that while Coleman did not directly participate in Whitmore's discriminatory behavior, his failure to speak up or intervene made him complicit. He accepted the consequences without protest, telling investigators that he understood why his silence was unacceptable. The case prompted action far beyond Sky Eagle. Other airlines rushed to review their own policies, worried that similar problems might be lurking in their organizations. The Federal Aviation Administration announced new guidelines for preventing and addressing discrimination in the aviation industry. Several members of Congress called for hearings on workplace discrimination in airlines, and legislation was proposed to strengthen protections for employees who reported misconduct. Perhaps most significantly, the case inspired other victims to come forward. In the months following the incident, the FAA received a surge of complaints from aviation workers across the country. Black pilots reported being passed over for promotions despite superior qualifications. Female flight attendants described years of harassment that their employers had ignored. Latino ground crew members shared stories of ethnic slurs and hostile treatment. The dam had broken, and stories that had been suppressed for years were finally being told. Denise Harper became an unlikely celebrity in the aviation world. She received thousands of messages from people who had experienced similar discrimination, expressing gratitude that someone had finally stood up and made the industry pay attention. Major airlines invited her to speak at corporate events. Aviation schools asked her to address their students. She was profiled in national magazines and interviewed on television news programs. But Denise was uncomfortable with the spotlight. She had not intended to become a public figure. She had simply been doing her job when she encountered a racist pilot who could not see past his own prejudices. In interviews, she consistently redirected attention from herself to the larger issues at stake. "This is not about me," she said during one television appearance. "This is about the thousands of people in this industry who face discrimination every day. They do not have FAA badges to protect them. They do not have viral videos to amplify their stories. But their experiences are just as real and just as damaging. If my experience helps shine a light on their struggles, then something good will have come from what happened at that airport." True to her word, Denise used her newfound platform to advocate for systemic change. She helped establish a new organization for minority aviation professionals, providing mentorship and legal support to workers who faced discrimination. She testified before Congress about the need for stronger enforcement of civil rights laws in the airline industry. She worked with the FAA to develop more rigorous procedures for investigating discrimination complaints. 1 year after the incident, Denise was promoted to a newly created position, Director of Diversity, Equity, and Aviation Safety at the FAA. It was a role that combined her expertise in flight operations with her commitment to creating a more inclusive industry. She would oversee initiatives to recruit and retain diverse talent, develop new training programs for airline employees, and ensure that discriminatory behavior was identified and addressed before it could endanger passengers or crew. Sky Eagle Airlines, meanwhile, underwent a painful but necessary transformation. The company hired its first chief diversity officer, a black woman named Adrienne Washington who had previously worked in civil rights law. New hiring practices were implemented to increase diversity among pilots and senior staff. Within a year, the company had recruited 5 black pilots and 7 female pilots, more than in the previous decade combined. The changes were not without resistance. Some employees grumbled about being forced to attend sensitivity training. Some pilots complained that standards were being lowered to meet diversity targets. But the company's leadership, chastened by the scandal and fearful of further federal action, remained committed to the new course. What happened with Captain Whitmore was a wake-up call. The new CEO, a woman named Patricia Sterling, said in an interview, "We had allowed a culture of complacency to develop, a culture where discriminatory behavior was tolerated because it was easier than confronting it. That culture nearly destroyed this company. We will not make that mistake again." 1 year to the day after the incident at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, Denise Harper stood at a podium in the auditorium of a prestigious aviation academy in Phoenix, Arizona. Before her sat 300 young people, their faces bright with hope and ambition, waiting to hear from the woman who had become a symbol of resilience in their industry. They were diverse in every way, men and women, people of every race and background, united only by their dream of taking to the skies. The Academy had invited her to deliver the keynote address at their graduation ceremony. It was an honor she had accepted with some reluctance, still uncomfortable with the celebrity that had followed her since that October morning. But when she looked out at the faces in the crowd, she knew exactly what she wanted to say. "A year ago today," she began, "I walked into an airport in Dallas, Texas, expecting an ordinary day. I was doing my job, following my routine, preparing to board a flight like I had done thousands of times before. But that day was different. That day, I encountered a man who could not see past my skin color. He looked at me and saw everything he expected to see. A black woman who did not belong, a trespasser in his world, someone to be questioned, challenged, humiliated. He did not know who I was. He did not care. He had already decided what I was based on nothing more than the color of my skin." She paused, letting the words settle over the audience. "My father was a pilot. He served in the United States Air Force for 25 years, flying missions that took him around the world. He was one of the first black pilots of his generation, and he faced men like Captain Whitmore every single day of his career. They told him he did not belong. They questioned his abilities. They tried to keep him on the ground, but he kept flying. He kept proving them wrong. And on his deathbed, he made me promise that I would do the same." Denise smiled, remembering her father's face, the fire in his eyes, even at the end. "He told me something I have never forgotten. He said the sky has no color. When you are up there, when you are soaring above the clouds, and the earth is just a distant memory below you, none of the things that divide us down here matter anymore. Up there, we are all just human beings, doing something miraculous. We are flying." She looked out at the graduates, making eye contact with as many as she could. "But to get up there, we have to fight our way through the people who want to keep us on the ground. The people who look at us and see only what they expect to see. The people who cannot imagine a world where someone who looks like us could command an aircraft or lead a crew or make the decisions that keep passengers safe. These people exist in every industry, at every level, and you will encounter them. I promise you that. When you do, remember this. They do not get to decide your worth. They do not get to tell you who you are or what you can achieve. You have already proven yourself by being here today, by completing this program, by earning your place among the best young aviators in this country. No one can take that from you. No one can ground you unless you let them." She straightened her shoulders, feeling the weight of all the history that had brought her to this moment. "I also want to say something about the people who stay silent. In that airport a year ago, there was another pilot standing beside Captain Whitmore. His name was Bradley Coleman, and he watched everything that happened without saying a word. He knew it was wrong. You could see it in his face. But he was afraid. Afraid of losing his job. Afraid of challenging a senior captain. Afraid of the consequences of speaking up. So he said nothing. I want you to understand something. Silence, in the face of injustice, is not neutrality. It is complicity. When you see someone being treated unfairly, when you witness discrimination, or harassment, or abuse, and you choose to look away, you become part of the problem. You do not have to be the hero who confronts the villain directly. But you can speak up. You can report what you see. You can refuse to pretend that everything is normal when you know it is not. Bradley Coleman learned that lesson the hard way. He lost 6 months of his career, and he will carry the shame of his silence for the rest of his life. But to his credit, he has tried to make amends. He now volunteers at flight schools, teaching young pilots about ethical leadership and the importance of speaking up. He made a mistake, but he is trying to be better. And that is all any of us can do. Denise glanced at the front row of the audience, where a familiar figure sat watching her intently. It was Bradley Coleman himself, invited to the ceremony at Denise's request. Their eyes met briefly, and he nodded, acknowledging the truth of her words. I want to close with a story about my grandmother, Denise continued. Her name was Rosetta May Harper, and in 1955, she participated in the Montgomery bus boycott. For over a year, she walked to work every single day rather than ride a segregated bus. She wore out 3 pairs of shoes. She faced threats and insults and exhaustion, but she never gave up. Because she knew that what she was doing mattered. She knew that every step she took was a step toward a better world. That is the legacy I carry with me. The legacy of people who refused to accept the world as it was, who insisted on making it better for those who came after them. My grandmother walked so that my father could fly. My father flew so that I could soar even higher. And now I am passing that legacy to you. You are the future of this industry. Some of you will fly commercial jets. Some of you will train the next generation of pilots. Some of you will work in aviation safety or air traffic control, or any of the dozens of roles that keep our skies safe. Whatever path you choose, remember that you are part of something bigger than yourself. You are proving every day that the sky belongs to everyone, that talent and dedication matter more than skin color or gender, that the old barriers are falling one by one. She looked out at the diverse faces before her, feeling hope swell in her chest. Never let anyone tell you that you do not belong in the sky. Never let anyone make you feel small because of who you are. And when the Raymond Whitmores of the world try to push you down, remember what my father told me. Be twice as good, twice as calm, twice as prepared. And then prove them wrong with every perfect takeoff and every safe landing. Thank you. Now go fly. The auditorium erupted in applause as Denise stepped back from the podium. The graduates rose to their feet, cheering and clapping, their faces shining with inspiration. She had given them the truth of her experience, the hard-won wisdom of her journey, and now it was their turn to write their own stories in the endless blue sky. As she made her way off the stage, Bradley Coleman intercepted her. He looked older than he had a year ago, the weight of his choices visible in the lines around his eyes. But there was something different about him now, a quiet determination that had replaced his former passivity. Miss Harper, he said. I mean, Director Harper, I wanted to thank you for what you said about speaking up and for giving me a chance to be here today. Denise studied him for a moment, then nodded. You made a mistake, Mr. Coleman. But you are trying to make it right. That counts for something. I will never be silent again, he said. I promise you that. I believe you. She extended her hand, and he shook it firmly. Now go teach those young pilots everything you have learned. The hard way and the easy way. She walked away then, toward the window where she could see planes taking off in the distance. Each one was a tiny silver miracle, carrying passengers toward destinations unknown, piloted by men and women of every background imaginable. The sky really did have no color. It was open to anyone brave enough to claim it. Denise thought of her father, watching her from somewhere beyond the clouds. She thought of her grandmother, walking those dusty Montgomery streets. She thought of all the people who had fought so that she could stand here today, in a position of authority and influence, shaping the future of an industry that had once tried to exclude her. "I am still flying, Daddy," she whispered, higher than ever, and somewhere in the endless blue above her, she could almost hear him answer, "That is my girl. Now, I want to hear from you. What did you think of Denise's story? Did Captain Whitmore get what he deserved, or should the consequences have been different? Have you ever experienced or witnessed discrimination in your workplace? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another powerful story like this one. And remember, every like, every share, every comment helps spread the message that discrimination has no place in our world. Thank you for watching, thank you for listening, and thank you for being part of a community that believes in justice and equality. Until next time, remember what Denise's father said, "The sky has no color. When we rise above the things that divide us, we are all free." Take care of yourselves and take care of each other. See you in the next story. This powerful story teaches us several important lessons that we can carry with us in our daily lives. First, never judge people by their appearance. Captain Whitmore looked at Denise Harper and saw only what he expected to see based on the color of her skin. He could not imagine that a black woman in casual clothes might be a senior federal official with more authority than he had. His assumptions destroyed his 30-year career in 30 minutes. Second, silence is complicity. First Officer Bradley Coleman knew that what was happening was wrong, but he chose to stay quiet because he was afraid. His silence made him part of the problem. When we witness injustice and say nothing, we allow it to continue. Third, staying calm is a superpower. Denise never lost her composure, even when she was being humiliated in front of dozens of people. Her calm allowed her to gather evidence and wait for the perfect moment to reveal the truth. Anger would have given Whitmore an excuse to dismiss her. Fourth, change requires courage. Denise's grandmother walked for a year during the bus boycott. Her father flew despite constant discrimination. Denise herself fought for every achievement. Progress happens when ordinary people refuse to accept injustice. Fifth, your character is revealed when you have power. Whitmore had all the power that morning. He chose to use it for cruelty. How we treat people who cannot fight back shows who we really are. Now I want to hear your voice. Have you ever been judged unfairly because of how you look? Have you ever witnessed someone being treated differently because of their race or gender? What would you have done if you were in Bradley Coleman's position, watching injustice happen right in front of you? Drop your answers in the comments below. Your stories matter, and sharing them helps others feel less alone. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button right now. Your like helps this video reach more people who need to hear this message. Subscribe to this channel and tap the notification bell so you never miss another inspiring story. We share powerful content every week that will move you, challenge you, and remind you of the good in humanity. Share this video with someone who needs encouragement today. Share it with someone who has faced discrimination. Share it with someone who needs to remember that staying silent is never the answer. Thank you so much for watching until the end. Thank you for being part of this community. Thank you for believing that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. May you always have the courage to stand up for what is right. May you find strength in the stories of those who came before you. and may you never let anyone tell you where you belong. Take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and keep reaching for the sky. See you in the next story.